Honourable Senators, before proceeding to question period with the Minister, I would like to remind you of the time limits the Senate established for questions and answers in the order of June 4, 2025. So when the Senate receives a minister for question period, as is the case today, the length of a main question is limited to 1 minute and the answer to 1 minute and 30 seconds. The supplementary question and answer are each limited to 45 seconds. In all these cases, the reading clerk stands 10 seconds before the time expires. I will now ask the minister to enter and take his seat. Honorable
Senators, today we have with us for question period the Honorable Dominic LeBlanc, PC, MP, President of the King's Privy Council for Canada and Minister responsible for Canada-US trade, intergovernmental affairs, internal trade, and One Canadian economy, to respond to questions concerning his ministerial responsibilities. On behalf of all Senators, I welcome the Minister. Minister, as I noted to the Senate, a main question is limited to 1 minute, and your response to 1 minute, 30 seconds. The question and answer for a supplementary question are both limited to 45 seconds. The reading clerk stands 10 seconds before these times expire. And I also ask everyone to respect these times, and question period will last 64 minutes. Senator Carignan, first question. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Minister. I'm glad you'll have a minute 30 because my first question has to do with a number, so you'll have a minute 30 to give me the number. When it comes to the illegal tariffs, last Friday, the U.S. Supreme Court, as you know, invalidated a significant proportion of the tariffs imposed by Donald Trump on a large number of businesses around the world, and several experts say that these unjustified and illegal tariffs represent 173 to perhaps up to 227 billion Canadian dollars. Of this staggering amount, how many billions do you think Canadian businesses were cheated out of by these illegal tariffs? Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. If you will allow, at the beginning, thank you, Honourable Senators, for the invitation. It's always a privilege. Senator Carignan, thank you for the question. You did say it. We maintained that reciprocal tariffs, as President Trump announced, they were not justified. We were pleased with the Supreme Court's decision in the United States, indicating that the tariffs applied to Canadian businesses will go down, but there's a lot of challenges for various sectors. If I've understood your question, Senator Carignan, you're wondering exactly how much money Canadian companies paid, and at one point, how much might they get back, if I've understood correctly. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want to anticipate your question. I would be pleased to provide you with that information. I saw a preliminary analysis after the decision on Friday, but I would be very happy to share the exact numbers with you, which are rather high, and I'm anticipating your next question. Senator Carignan. Yes, the number we're eagerly anticipating. The Canadian government has been rather timid in its reaction. There were few responses. You gave an interview saying that you were satisfied. Can you tell us how the government plans to recover these amounts for Canadian businesses. What measures do you plan to undertake to recover those amounts? Honourable Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I cannot imagine, Senator Carignan, that you saw a reaction from our government you would qualify as timid. I agreed to speak on Gérald Fillion's show, and I was heading home from Radio Canada in Montreal when the Supreme Court decision came out. And so as I was traveling, or rather moving about through the building, reporters were following me, and I think I ended up with 6 or 7 interviews. But you are right, Senator Carignan, in the sense that the Supreme Court remained silent on the matter of recovering those costs. Those sums were paid by private companies. They have recourse before American law to recover that. The government will have to support them, but it is a private matter. Thank you, Minister. Senator Carignan. So you won't be taking any steps in their place? I must interrupt. I will return to Senator Carignan for your next question. You hold several positions, including Minister of Internal Trade. During the last election campaign, March 21st, 2025, the Prime Minister promised free trade between Canadian provinces by Canada Day, that was in 2025, by gradually removing all federal exemptions that were limiting internal trade. Nearly 9 months after Canada Day 2025, no one has yet heard of a genuine free trade agreement between provinces. Minister, how many federal exemptions that limit domestic trade in Canada have been removed by your government, and when? Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I can give you a detailed answer. All of the federal government's barriers were removed. It was in a bill passed, Bill C-5, when we met with internal trade ministers for the first time in a long time. We came to the conversation by indicating that federal exemptions to any kind of free trade agreement in Canada would be eliminated.
Senator Carignan.
Senator Carignan. So the government taking on a leadership role, overseeing ministers' conferences to make sure that it's happening in the provinces as well. We seem to still be waiting for results. Your Prime Minister is traveling throughout the capital cities of the world, but not provincial capital cities, in order to show leadership regarding interprovincial barriers. So where are we at for this portion of interprovincial trade barriers? Honourable Minister. Good news, Senator. We're moving forward very well. I think premiers visit provincial capitals, and Mr. Harper never had a meeting with all of the stakeholders here. There was a dinner at Meech Lake before that, and there was a meeting the next day where we certainly raised the importance of removing barriers between provinces and territories when it came to trucking, all of the interprovincial barriers, and sailing goods. We made 2 advancements we hadn't seen for some time, but yes, there's progress left to be made. Thank you, Minister. Senator Beam.
Minister, good to have you here. I'm way down here. You recently returned from Mexico after leading probably the largest Canadian delegation in commercial terms to that country, which of course is our 3rd largest trading partner. Much is on the line, obviously, for both of us in the renegotiation, if that's what it comes to, of CUSMA and the overall tension. So I'd like to ask you about the opportunities for closer collaboration between Canada and Mexico, but also whether the bilateral thinking with your counterpart is aligned in terms of any specific sector revisions versus starting from scratch. That's the one. And if we are to expand our trade with Mexico, can we do that without sending product through the United States? So specifically intermodal along both Atlantic and Pacific coasts.
Monsieur le Ministre.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Senator Beam, thank you for the question. Of course, you have considerable experience yourself in the relationship between Canada and Mexico. You're right, it was the largest bilateral trade mission in decades. Almost 400 Canadians accompanied me, representing 230 businesses, big and small, and business associations, 3 cities, Guadalajara, Monterrey, and Mexico City. The first question, Senator Beam, the Mexican government, I had the opportunity to meet President Sheinbaum with some colleagues. My vis-a-vis is Secretary Ebrard, very much aligned with the government of Mexico in terms of the importance of a trilateral review, not a renegotiation of CUSMA. They are of the view, as we are, that there's a lot of benefit to the 3 economies to have a trilateral free trade agreement. One country has some particular issues with Mexico and Canada. We can work through those, we believe, and preserve the important trilateral framework. That's the view that the Mexicans expressed to me. It's one with which we're in complete agreement. And if we want to increase our bilateral trade between Canada and Mexico, separate and apart from the North American free trade context, you're absolutely right, Senator. Intermodal transport links are critical. An iconic Canadian rail company, Canadian Pacific, Kansas City Southern, has invested considerably, has a huge footprint in Mexico, and Logistec, a Quebec company, is acquiring a port on the East Coast.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator Beam.
I yield the rest of my time to Senator Lafreda.
Senator Lafreda.
Thank you. Minister LeBlanc, welcome to the Senate. I want to discuss internal and interprovincial barriers, something we've been talking about for almost 160 years now, but more specifically, the work of the Committee on Internal Trade and the Canadian Mutual Recognition Agreement it signed in November. My question focuses on Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises, what I've always described as the heart and soul of our economy. Can you speak to us about the positive impact the agreement will have for SMEs who sometimes lack the resources to navigate multiple regulatory systems across provinces and territories? How will the agreement help them access a larger domestic market more seamlessly and cost-effectively?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Madam Speaker, Senator, thank you for the question. It follows up on Senator Carignan's question. You're much more optimistic than your Conservative colleague, which I think is great. As you noted, that significant agreement that was signed in November between all the provinces at a meeting in Yellowknife where I was, Ontario and Nova Scotia have shown enormous leadership in our federation. We signed an agreement around the mutual recognition for the sale of goods. And we got rid of the interprovincial trucking barriers, which made no sense. For small and medium-sized businesses, they now can sell a particular item in Nova Scotia, and it's deemed to comply with all of the sale of goods requirements in another jurisdiction. That's just one brief example.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator Lafreda, vous avez une...
Thank you, Minister. Senator Lafreda, you have 1 minute, 45 seconds.
Another question. Thank you for that response. And I looked at the committee's 2025 year-in review highlights, and I noted that the parties have concluded financial services negotiations and will incorporate a new chapter into the CFTA in 2026. Can you expand how these changes might facilitate the supply of financial services across Canada and make access to capital for SMEs, which is so important, more easily obtained and delivered?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Again, Senator, thank you for the question. Financial services, in terms of having true free trade between the 13 provinces and territories in Canada, has always been a challenge. Different provincial regulators have different rules. It has for a long time. The Government of Canada had some exemptions to the free trade agreement in financial services, which, of course, were eliminated in June by the adoption of the legislation that this House and the House of Commons adopted. It is work that's being led largely by Ontario. We have an in-person meeting co-chaired by Canada and Nunavut in March of the Committee on Internal Trade. The premiers agreed with the Prime Minister at our meeting in January that we would try and make very significant quick progress on building codes and mutual recognition of labor and trades because of the importance, for example, of the construction of housing and other labor mobility issues. I intend to push the provinces on the access to capital issues. As you said, if I think in Atlantic Canada, the number of financial institutions 20 years ago that may have offered opportunities to those SMEs has significantly diminished, so they're doing business with a company in another jurisdiction now, and they're caught up in these interprovincial rules.
Natalia Freda.
So to wrap that up and to continue on that thought, how's the communication process coming along to the SMEs? Have you talked to many of them? Are they positive, confident that they will be able to navigate across Canada, have access to capital like they should have, and keep our economy going forward, progressing?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Madam Speaker, a very good question, Senator. In fact, one of the things that the Prime Minister and I committed to First Ministers, and I said this when we met as the Committee on Internal Trade at that meeting in Yellowknife you referred to in November, we have a Trade Commissioner Service which helps small and medium-sized businesses, to Senator Beam's question, access the Mexican market. I saw that last week myself. We're in the process of standing up with provincial partners the equivalent of a domestic trade commissioner's service, precisely so we can take some of that energy and enthusiasm and use federal, regional development agencies and provincial partners to assist those small businesses in Canada as well.
Senator Alzheimer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Welcome back, Mr. LeBlanc. Since the U.S. Supreme Court ruling, President Trump has since pivoted to a new tariff authority imposing a 10 to 15% global levy. Minister, how does the Supreme Court's invalidation of the EPA-based tariffs and the President's immediate imposition of new levies under a separate legal authority change Canada's practical exposure under CUSMA, and what is the government's legal assessment of whether these replacement tariffs are themselves CUSMA compliant?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Madam Speaker, through you, Senator, thank you for the question. The final legal advice and analysis is being prepared or is being put together. Obviously, over the weekend, we had some preliminary advice, both from our embassy in Washington and the legal advisors the government has, both in Canada and in the United States. The interesting thing, you're right, the President is, since his authority under the IEPA legislation was evacuated, he's using a different piece of American legislation. He's announced 10% and then 15% sort of across-the-board tariffs under American law can't be in place for more than 150 days without congressional authority. I spoke earlier this week with the U.S. Trade Representative, Ambassador Greer. The Americans immediately indicated that there would be a CUSMA exemption from this new tariff that the President was proposing, similar to had been in existence under the IEPA tariffs. That is an important recognition of the value of the trilateral agreement. There's no doubt the President has always said that he will continue to look at American law to implement his tariff agenda. The fact that the American government recognized the CUSMA exemption again tells me that they see value in the agreement.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator Alzheimer.
Minister, Also, the Supreme Court's ruling has shifted the tariff debate to Capitol Hill. Partisan legislation aimed at bipartisan legislation aimed at reasserting congressional authority over trade has gained new momentum. How is Canada engaging directly with the congressional counterparts, the Senate Finance Committee, for example, and House Ways and Means Committee in particular, to help shape any forthcoming U.S. trade legislation in a manner consistent with CUSMA's obligations and Canada's market access interest?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Madame la Présidente, I think properly identified the very considerable value that we as a government place on parliamentary diplomacy. There are members of this chamber that have relationships with U.S. legislators. There are interparliamentary associations, many members I'm sure are in this chamber, that do very good work. I know our ambassador, the previous ambassador, who I understand was in your gallery earlier today, Ambassador Hillman had been extraordinarily engaged for many years with legislators in both houses in the United States. I was with the Prime Minister when he spoke with the new Ambassador Wiseman, very much part of his priority work as well. And I myself, when I'm in the United States, talk to senior Republican leaders as well.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Henkel. Hello, Minister. Thank you for being with us. Minister, a midwife trained in Vancouver cannot work directly in Moncton. An electrician from Alberta cannot work in Montreal. The act of bringing a baby into the world or working on electricity does not change at provincial borders, yet professional orders claim that they do. In the meantime, our hospitals are short-staffed, our construction sites are short of technicians, and skilled immigrants recruited at great expense from abroad wait years for the right to work in their field. Minister, you promised a 30-day standard for processing interprovincial recognition applications. Why has this standard still not come into effect, and when will it be implemented? Minister, thank you, Madam Speaker and Senator, for the question. We have always thought, I fully agree with your question and the issues you've identified. The premiers, in their meetings when I took part with Mr. Carney, well, the one that was the most insistent were always Ontario and Nova Scotia. Others agreed with them. However, it's a question of trusting each other. If someone in Alberta is qualified to become a hospital technician, then it would be great if this mutual recognition existed and he could then work in New Brunswick. The way that these professional orders are legislated is in the hands of the provincial legislatures. We have a certain way of encouraging them. I have even said publicly that we want important, or rather major, progress on labor mobility. You identified healthcare in particular, one that's essential for Canadians. I've even heard that if we don't get progress quickly enough, we should think twice about the monies we send to provinces to get them to act faster. Thank you, Minister. A Canadian small, medium business must today comply with the CUSMA regulation to avoid tariffs. But if Trump gains what he wants in July, that is to break down CUSMA, these countries of origin regulations could change overnight. What do you recommend to SMEs, and how much were they consulted before you entered the room? Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. We have had significant consultations with many organizations that represent the SMEs you've identified.
along with provinces, territories, and sectors that are the focus of these sectoral tariffs. We've held public consultations as well. This week, I met another two major Canadian sectors to discuss these matters. I don't want to disagree with your question, but I do not think that we'll end up with bilateral agreements. I think the trilateral agreement will still be in place if the various parties want to discuss rules of origin. Thank you, Minister.
You're up next.
Thank you, Speaker. Welcome, Minister. Good to have you. See you here in the pink of health. Minister, within hours of the U.S. Supreme Court decision on the IEEPA tariffs, the administration pivoted to Section 122, imposing a 15% global surcharge that expires in 150 days, while Section 232 tariffs remain in place. While Section 122 is temporary, Section 301 remains available to target Canada specifically. Have you or your officials conducted a formal risk assessment of potential Section 301 exposure?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You're absolutely right, Senator. Section 232 tariffs remain the most significant economic headwind currently for large sectors and important sectors of the Canadian economy. So we are continuing to work with the Americans to see if there's a way to bring some relief to those, we think, also unjustified sectoral tariffs. That's the Section 232. You're right. Ambassador Greer, the U.S. Trade Representative, has indicated publicly he will launch some Section 301, exactly the premise of your question, I think, investigations, which allow then him to recommend certain remedies to the President, including the imposition of other tariffs. This is a sort of an ongoing threat of the U.S. administration. It's not new. They pivoted to Section 301 in light of the Supreme Court decision. I know our embassy in Washington is presently doing some work. I haven't seen, again, they haven't announced the details of precisely which investigations have begun. My communication with Ambassador Greer this week was cordial, hoping to see him towards the end of next week. That's precisely a question that I'll put to him. I'd like to understand the detail of where they're proposing to go, and Canada will, of course, be ready to support those industries that may be targeted, as we did in the 232 tariffs, ad venant, or should that be the case.
Senator McDonald.
Yes. Minister, legal analysts note that Section 301 of the U.S. Trade Act could be used to target countries over, and I quote, unreasonable or discriminatory practices with no upper limit on the tariff rate. Canada has, we have provincial alcohol embargoes and supply management issues, and they've been cited as possible triggers that can invite U.S. tariff retaliation. So given this vulnerability, what is the government doing to reduce the risk of retaliatory action ahead of the CUSMA review?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Madam Speaker, fundamental question, Senator. I wouldn't pretend reduce the risk of retaliatory action. That's a very big phrase to ask. We're constantly looking to reduce the risk of retaliatory action. This administration is unlike previous administrations. They can decide to go in a particular direction, often without any notice or without much forewarning. The Section 301 tariffs require an investigation that can lead. I don't disagree with the premise of your question. I think we need to continue to make the argument that these interests are against the Americans.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci.
Thank you, Minister.
I pass. Thank you. Yep.
Senator Daskal.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister. My question follows other questions about interprovincial trade. Your government has reduced the barriers that you are responsible for. You've made more progress than the provinces have in reducing their interprovincial barriers. And we also know from the economic analysis that a full reduction of interprovincial barriers would increase GDP quite significantly. You've mentioned some initiatives that the provinces are undertaking now. I'd like to know if your economic analysis, what does it show in terms of the critical areas or initiatives at the interprovincial level that would have the most impact if they were implemented? So I'd like to get a sense of, what those areas might be, first of all. Thank you.
Monsieur le Ministre.
So, Madam
Minister.
Senator, thank you for the question. The premise of your question is absolutely right. The upside economic benefit to Canada's GDP is considerable. The Prime Minister has said it, I think, we can give ourselves as a country more than any country can take away. I think when he speaks of that, he means reducing these internal trade barriers and focusing on major projects. But the internal trade barriers alone, we've seen estimates as recently as a couple of months ago, 3.5% to 4% of the GDP in a truly free trade context. I'm optimistic, Senator. The provinces are showing a great deal of willingness to move at speeds. This has been a 2-decade-long challenge. Everybody had reasons why this basket of exceptions were critical, including the previous governments of Canada. We're urging and working with the provinces to prioritize the building trades in terms of, to your colleague's question, mutual recognition of, for example, skilled trades. We think that we can do a lot of work on harmonizing building codes. It makes no sense that a modular home made in New Brunswick can be more easily sold in Maine than it can in Prince Edward Island.
Are these the areas that you feel would have the greatest impact on GDP, or are there some other areas out there that also need a lot of work?
Well, Senator, there are many areas that need a lot of work, so your question about prioritization is the right one. We think if you look at the needs of Canadians around housing, the ability to build quickly more houses, including modular housing construction. Provinces tell us it's their priority. We've put billions of federal dollars behind that initiative. We think it would be more efficient and improve the GDP of the country, not to mention the housing stock of Canadians, if we made significant progress quickly on mutual recognition in labor mobility. Let's start with skilled trades and perhaps the medical profession as an example.
Senator Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, thank you for being here. As you know, the sectorial tariffs have had significant impact on workers in the auto sector, steel sector, aluminum, and softwood lumber. And of course, these sectors have been devastated and remain so. We've seen the loss of auto plants that have been idle both in Ontario. The bigger question I have is, in the context of our engagement around CUSMA, I would like to not call it renegotiations, because that's not what it's supposed to be. It's a renewal of the agreement. Is the government priority to seek to eliminate these tariffs as soon as possible, given the fundamental impact they've had on workers and community across this country?
Monsieur le Ministre.
So, Madam Speaker, Senator, you have a long experience in representing workers in this country. You've identified sectors of our economy: steel, aluminum, automobiles, softwood lumber. Those are critical sectors for Canada's GDP. Thousands of skilled, many cases, most cases unionized workers earn their living in communities big and small right across the country. If you take those sectors, some provinces are more dominant in particular sectors than others. I come from a province where the softwood lumber industry critical in communities right across my province and across the country. We do believe that the priority is to bring relief to these sectoral tariffs as part of, and you said it well, Senator, it's not a renegotiation of the CUSMA agreement. It's not 2016 again. It's a review that was built into the agreement 6 years from the date of coming into force. It's July this year. It's not a chapter-by-chapter renegotiation. We hope that as part of that review, because we believe it's in the American economic interest for American consumers and workers, that we can get to a position, and working with our Mexican friends and American business organizations and American business leaders and groups representing American workers, that these tariffs can be adjusted downward precisely as part of that review.
Senator Youssef.
Minister, I think the government certainly has shown a commitment to keep protecting these sectors. They're vital to our industrial economy. Last week, we announced an industrial strategy in this country. How are we going to utilize our broader export and internal creation of new markets and new development of our military industrial strategy to ensure we can re-employ these workers in the sectors that's been devastated by these impacts?
So, Madam Speaker, thank you, Senator, for identifying or for highlighting the announcement last week the Prime Minister and some of my colleagues made around a defense industrial strategy at a time when Canadians want the Government of Canada to increase its defense spending to meet our NATO commitments. We have to do it in a way that brings maximum benefit to Canadian workers and Canadian industries. I think the Prime Minister said the priorities would be to build, partner, and buy. Let's build the high-quality equipment that the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces need here in Canada. Let's partner with like-minded countries that want to build that with us. And ultimately, the third recourse would be to buy if we haven't been able to build or partner. That might just be an example.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator Osler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for being here. Your 2025 CUSMA consultations confirmed a clear consensus among Canadians for a do-no-harm approach to the 2026 review. And as you know, Medicare is currently protected in CUSMA through reservations primarily found in Annex 1 and 2. However, while Reservation 2C6 theoretically shields Medicare, its public purpose clause is a known legal vulnerability if Canada expands or modernizes its public health offerings. In light of these findings, how will your enforcement strategy specifically safeguard the autonomy of provincial health insurance plans against trade-based challenges? And will you commit to keeping Annex 2 protections, the protections for health and social services, off the table to ensure this remains a review and not a platform for eroding our sovereign right to deliver health care?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Madam Speaker, Senator, I think a fundamental question you just asked. I'm happy to commit that the government will, in those review discussions with our American friends, preserve precisely the exemptions that you identified. The Americans, it picks up a question of your colleague, the Americans in their conversations with us are focused on a few sectors of the economy where the President is intent on putting global tariffs as a pursuit of American policy to bring these manufacturing industries to the United States. That is properly the subject of American political discourse and debate. We have not, in my conversations with the United States, with Secretary Lutnick, with Ambassador Greer, they have not raised these issues with us in any way, and nor would the government in any way engage in renegotiating or weakening. And I'm not trying to parse the words and be cute. It's not something that the government of Canada would consider, but to be very fair, it's not something up to now that any of our partners in the trilateral agreement have raised with us.
Thank you, Minister. Alberta's Bill 11 legislates a dual-track system that encourages private insurance coverage for medically necessary care. Legal experts warn this shift could weaken our Reservation 2C6 protection, which requires health measures to be maintained for a public purpose. So in other words, by allowing physicians to bill both the public system and private patients concurrently, Alberta may be stripping these services of their public purpose status, potentially opening a backdoor for U.S. firms to demand market access under CUSMA's national treatment obligations. During the upcoming review, what specific safeguards will you implement to ensure provincial privatization does not provide a loophole for the U.S. to challenge our Medicare system?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, Senator, thank you for that question. The first time I've heard the precision of drawing a connection between those lines is right now. But the importance of protecting the Canadian public health care system from these theoretical or potential American trade actions is obviously of great importance. So the good news is I'll be back at the office when the Speaker releases me 64 minutes. I thought it was 60 minutes, but once my time here has expired, I'll be happy, Senator, to ask that exact question and share with you the answer.
Senator Cousineau.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good to see my friend in good health and good spirits, obviously. Minister, you've emerged as a bit of a Swiss Army knife for the Prime Minister, taking on a broad scope of responsibilities. One of them being the President of the King's Privy Council, and as such, surely Bill C-4 has come across your desk. We've recently heard in committee from the Assistant Secretary of Cabinet, Kathy Hawara, how Part 4 confirms, and I'll quote, Parliament's long-standing intent respecting its exclusive regulation of federal political parties with dealings in personal information, end quote. Now, I realize all members of the other House supported this with their votes, but senators have registered a strong concern about that particular provision because of the scant review.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Senator. Monsieur le Ministre.
It's a tragedy to cut off such an excellent question. But perhaps you'll allow me to imagine what Senator Cousineau was going to ask in that fantastic question. Senator, colleagues, I was the minister responsible for democratic institutions. It used to be part of the King's Privy Council function, Senator, as you know. That particular function now resides with our government House leader, but for many years I was the minister responsible for democratic institutions. I was the minister at a time when a privacy commissioner in a province decided to apply a privacy regime of a provincial government to the Canada Elections Act. I do not believe it's in the national interest of the country to have a patchwork quilt of provincial privacy commissioners or interpretations on something as fundamental as protecting the private data of Canadian electors. The good news is all of the political parties represented in the House of Commons believe that we have found the way to have a robust national regime working with political parties to provide that protection. I don't think it properly is the jurisdiction of a provincial privacy commissioner to opine on the Canada Elections Act. I think we, as a parliament, have to take responsibility for the protection of that private information, and I think in this legislation we've done exactly that.
Senator Cousineau.
My second brief question would be about the Major Projects Office. And as you know, Minister, Nova Scotia is all in on wind energy, and Wind West Atlantic Energy Project has got huge potential to revolutionize energy in Atlantic Canada, producing 5,000 megawatts of power. Can you give us an update on that project, just where it stands, and the impacts for the province of Nova Scotia and markets beyond?
Monsieur le Ministre.
So, Madam Speaker, Senator, critical question in terms of major projects for our region, for your province of Nova Scotia, but for Atlantic Canada and partner jurisdictions that would benefit from such a significant development in wind energy. Premier Houston, with his Atlantic counterparts, has been a very effective advocate. We decided to advance the Wind West Atlantic Energy Project along with proponents to develop with the Major Projects Office the way to best support this initiative. As you know, Senator, last September, the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulator received, it was such a good question, Madam Speaker, and we're out of time.
No, while you are not out of time, I just want to mention that the very intimidating, the clerk, but thank you. So now your time is up. Senator Martin.
Minister LeBlanc, I think you would agree that your government's approach to U.S.-Canada relations and the upcoming CUSMA review has significant implications for Canadians. Transparency on these issues should therefore be a priority. Yet, according to media reports, you are giving an off-the-record speech at the Canadian Club in Toronto, closed to all media. So, Minister, what are you sharing with that audience that you believe Canadians shouldn't hear?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, through you, Senator, thanks for the question. I regularly accept to meet business organizations, representatives of workers, or others to talk about our conversations with the Americans. Many of these conversations are private. I've been around long enough to believe that a private conversation isn't private. And when I found out that, in fact, the group organizing this lunch, tickets sold out very quickly. I'm really excited about it on Thursday. The good news is I asked that, of course, we opened that. If you're going to have 200 or 300 people who bought tickets for your lunch, I'm not naive enough to think that somebody's not going to report on what was said. So the good news is that we opened it to the media. People can live stream it. I'll make sure, Senator, it's available on Facebook if you'd like to watch it. I think it'll be a fantastic experience on Thursday, and I'm sure the people that bought tickets, will be very enthusiastic at their investment.
Senator Martin?
I do have a Facebook account, so I look forward to that. So, Minister, from the outset, your government's message on Canada's trade relationship has created unmet expectations. Unrealistic timelines and unfocused efforts confuse Canadians and leave businesses hesitant to make critical investment decisions. So why isn't your government prioritizing clear, transparent communication with Canadians, especially given the unpredictability of our key trading partner to the south?
Monsieur le Ministre.
So thank you, Madam Speaker.
Minister.
It may not surprise you. I don't quite agree with the premise of that question. I think we have been very transparent and open with Canadians about the challenge that the world and Canada's economy and workers face with the Trump administration. We ran an election campaign where we were very transparent with Canadians about the importance of diversifying our trading relationships with reliable partners, building major projects here at home, and ensuring that we support workers and sectors of the economy that are unfairly targeted by tariffs that we think are unjustified. So we continue to pursue, if you will, a three-track approach, controlling what we can control here at home and working with our American and Mexican partners.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator Martin.
Thank you, Minister.
My second question is related to a recent IMF report highlighting the costs of interprovincial barriers, which you've already answered some questions about, duplicative regulations and restricted labor mobility, significant productivity losses, and a potential 7% GDP boost left unrealized. These domestic constraints are fully within Canada's control. While Bill C-5 is a step forward, it doesn't go far enough nor fast enough. So why is your government failing to deliver the one Canadian economy it promised? And what additional measures are being taken to unlock our full internal economic potential?
Monsieur le Ministre.
Madame la Présidente, Senator,
Madam Speaker.
to the IMF report. We think that should encourage all of us, and particularly our provincial and territorial partners, to take note of the very significant, that I agree with in terms of your question, economic upside to removing these barriers. Many of them are properly within the sovereign constitutional jurisdiction of provincial or territorial legislative assemblies. The good news is the provinces are working with one another and with us. Some provinces are, for example, declaring that they will recognize by default labor mobility or labor force credentials. So we have a patchwork quilt of provinces trying to lead the way. Our job is to encourage all of them to move as quickly as we can and to look at what federal instruments we have to encourage them with the full partnership of the Government of Canada to move as quickly as possible. So I'm not pessimistic about the progress we can make. I recognize the urgency of the moment, as your question did. But the good news is, as recently as in January, a month ago, the First Ministers in a private dinner the night before the meeting and during the meeting on the Thursday, the day after, committed to each other and to us to continue to make effective progress.
Senator Martin.
So on that note, Minister, as you say, provinces have a role, but there are things clearly that the federal government can do. So Conservatives have supported common sense reforms to unleash economic growth. And I'm sure you're aware of two very important bills. So why won't your government follow suit and repeal policies like Bill C-69 and Bill C-48 and other regulations that stifle our resource sector? This is something the federal government can do right now.
Monsieur le Ministre.
So, Madam Speaker, thank you for the question, Senator. The House of Commons pronounced itself on those particular Conservative motions some time ago. We think the government is making very significant progress in partnership with the government of Alberta. The Memorandum of Understanding the Prime Minister signed with Premier Smith is a very important step forward. We are working diligently with our partners in Alberta and other provinces as well, and Indigenous groups as well, on the implementation of those commitments. We regularly take stock. I chair a cabinet committee that's regularly updated on the progress of that work, and I am optimistic that we will be a very good partner for the government of Alberta in those industries and sectors you've identified.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator Cormier.
Merci.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Cormier.
Monsieur le Ministre.
Welcome to the Senate, Minister. Given the official review of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement in July last year, how do you measure the impact and benefits that the cultural exceptions had on the Canadian cultural industry since the agreement was signed in 2018? Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator Cormier, thank you for the question. I spent a significant portion of the morning yesterday with your friends who represent the cultural sector, cultural industries. My colleagues, Minister Miller and I, met with them for 2 hours. There was a group of representatives from all over Canada. We specifically discussed the importance of maintaining the cultural exemption. We also discussed the economic spin-offs that led to in Canada. I've seen that where there were cultural industries that accompanied me in Mexico, their enthusiasm to have Mexican partners, Moment Factory from Quebec, Acadilumina, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's a small example, but one that inspired me. They came with me to Mexico to set up, or maintain, rather, trade relationships. It led to a great deal of good within the industry and cultural stakeholders here in Canada, including linguistic minorities, whom we are all familiar with. Like my colleague, I was happy to meet with representatives yesterday. However, I don't think we've fully understood the economic importance of moving those industries forward within the framework of CUSMA. I did it a little bit in Mexico with Mr. Miller and our colleague from New Brunswick, the member David Miles, but we will definitely do more.
Senator Cormier.
Senator Cormier. Thank you, Minister. I'm very happy to hear you talk about the awareness of the economic impact that the cultural exemption has had on our cultural sector, including film and television, music. And right now, there's a significant fiction film being filmed in our area. Consulting the sector is one thing, but what are their main concerns for the future? What have you heard from them about the future of the cultural exemption? The Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Senator, they wanted reassurance that we weren't going to negotiate or weaken the cultural exemption. We protect the French language. We do so with a great deal of enthusiasm and no hesitation at all. I think that we can reassure them of the government's commitment to continue along those lines in the future for all the reasons that you did well to raise. Canadian news, Canadian stories, we celebrate them all over throughout the country. Obviously, these stakeholders are worried about funding, about having recurring funding from governments, plural. We want to be the best partner. We will continue to support them, and we will encourage our other partners to continue to do so. Thank you, Minister. Senator Quinn.
Thank you, Minister LeBlanc, for being here today. It's so great to see you in such good form. And thank you for being such a good promoter of New Brunswick product, especially maybe that coming from my hometown that's packaged in green boxes. So thank you for doing that. In considering the Building Canada Act, does the designation projects of national interest apply only to specific projects, or does it apply to infrastructure which supports getting product from the project to market? For example, increasing supply chain connectivity for a mine via service or rail corridors to a port eligible for inclusion as a component of such a project, or conversely, if a project under the Building Canada Act is taking place at a port and additional infrastructure is required outside the port to allow the fluidity of cargo to be maximized, would that type of essential supporting infrastructure be eligible as a component of the project?
Monsieur le Ministre.
So, Madam Speaker, Senator Quinn, thank you for the question. Your great city of St. John, I hope and believe, will be a beneficiary of our investment in improving trade infrastructure. The Port of St. John, that you know very well, is a source of great interest for our government and for the government of New Brunswick. So I do believe that improving the trade infrastructure, including the Port of St. John, amongst others, but that one that you know well, will be very much part of the work that we'll do over the next number of months. Your specific question in terms of designating a project, my advice or the interpretation that I've gotten from justice officials and from the major projects office is a designation. If ultimately the order in council process does a designation, it will be for a single project with a specific proponent as set out in the Building Canada Act. I do not believe, and I'm happy to go back and work with the Major Projects Office, but I believe that our interpretation of a designation is for the project itself. If you use enabling infrastructure or adjacent infrastructure, that would not properly be subject of the initial designation. That is the information I have, but happy to reconfirm.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Senator Quinn.
I'll cede the balance of my time to Senator Zidek.
5 seconds. Just a reminder.
As an economist and former Minister of Trade, I want to congratulate your government's efforts. I'll be very quick. My question has to do with Canada-EU-Mexico relationships and how the industries are positioning themselves in the face of China's. Canada imposed 100% tariffs on Chinese vehicles, but Mexico didn't follow suit. Could you please reconcile this? And supply chains are closely linked up in the automobile sector. The Minister. Senator, this was the subject of conversations I had with the Marcelo Ebrard in Mexico, the Secretary for Trade, I explained, as I did with our American counterparts, the targeted and limited nature of the agreement that the Prime Minister established with the Chinese government. As you know, we're going back to where we were in 2023. We made a decision to allow a very modest number of electric vehicles from China to come in based on permit acquisition. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Senator Simons.
Much. Minister, immigration to Alberta has been falling precipitously since 2024. In the last quarter, there was a net in-migration of international migrants of 197 people. Nonetheless, the Premier of Alberta last week announced a series of 9 referenda, many of which deal with denying services to new Canadians. Your office yesterday said that the province had every right to launch those referenda, which I agree with, that they have that right. But I am concerned about the specific questions that involve the denial of public health care to new Canadians. And I'm wondering if you could clarify what the position would be under the Canada Health Act or the results of any referenda that denied medical services to people who were not Canadian citizens or landed immigrants.
Monsieur le Ministre.
Madam Speaker, Senator, thank you for the question. It won't surprise you that I'm not going to offer a view on a hypothetical outcome of a hypothetical referendum in one particular province. But what I can share, I think, what is the concern in the premise of your question about the responsibility that all orders of government have in our federation for providing public health care services to people entitled to those services. I think Canadians understandably are proud that we offer those services to those who are in Canada in a way that meets our obligations under the Canada Health Act. We expect provinces will continue to want to do that. So we'll allow the province of Alberta and the Alberta legislature to make their decisions in the coming months, but we will always talk to our partners in the Federation about the importance of offering medically necessary healthcare services to those entitled to those services, and that would include, of course, asylum claimants and others who are here in Canada on Canadian soil.
Senator Simons.
Now, those 9 referenda aren't hypothetical. Those are real. The Premier has announced them. The 10th referendum is hypothetical, and that's the referendum on Alberta's sovereignty. And I'm wondering, this one is hypothetical, what role you as Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs intend to play if Alberta does go ahead with a sovereignty referendum? What will the federal government's stance on that be?
Monsieur le Ministre.
So you acknowledge, Senator, it is a hypothetical question, I'm not going to offer views on a hypothetical referendum. The outcome, you did identify the Premier's discussion of these referenda. The outcome, of course, is hypothetical. But in the 10th example that you used, I think the best thing that we can do is focus on the work that we have committed to doing with the government of Alberta and with Alberta business leaders and groups representing workers in the province of Alberta. The Prime Minister and Premier Smith have agreed on a memorandum of understanding. We're committed to implementing that within the time frame with which we agreed to do that. That's the priority.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Sénatrice.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Jarba.
Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Welcome, Minister. Recently, you led an important trade mission to Mexico, which had 370 delegates and 240 organizations in order to deepen economic ties and explore new opportunities. What are the concrete results, investment, specific commitments, agreements? What came of this trade mission? Minister. Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is a very good question in the sense that you correctly identified the substantial interest for Canadian organizations and companies, whether large or small. I participated in many meetings in Monterrey and in Mexico, at Mexico City. And we saw there were 1,800 meetings between Canadian businesses and potential partners in Mexico. This type of trade activity takes several months to materialize, and I believe over the next several months we'll be introducing solid measures to support businesses. Logistec in Quebec recently announced a major investment into a seaport on the eastern coast of Mexico. That was a suggestion from President Sheinbaum. Doug Monte talked about connectivity from port to port. That's very specific. A Quebec company and large sums of money. The good news is that I met with the CEO of a Mexican mining company, which invested nearly $750 million to acquire a gold mine in Quebec. That was an investment from Mexico into Canada, and it's one of the first times they've ever done so. Senator Gerba, thank you for that answer. Are these economic spin-offs robust or solid enough to influence the diversification of exports other than to the United States? And are there other measures being considered? Minister, Madam Speaker, I think that yes, Madam Senator, in the sense that it's an impressive start. Diversifying our exports and our trade relationships bilaterally with Mexico is impressive. But as I said, and some of your other colleagues have a lot of experience there, it's a process that necessarily requires a certain amount of time in order to lead to signed agreements between private companies. The good news is that last week I was in Mexico, and the Prime Minister is going to Japan and to India and Australia in order to continue to try and reach other markets. Thank you, Minister. Honourable Senators, the time for question period has expired.
That you will want to join me in thanking Mr. Minister LeBlanc for joining us today. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.